Okay, hi. I don't know if Masha introduced me, but I'm Erin Choi. I'm a senior Russian major, and I'll be graduating this spring. I did my project, or my thesis, on Cheburashka, which is a Soviet animation that is like one of the most popular cartoons from Russia from the mid-60s to early 80s. And I focused on talking about the idea that it kind of subverted the idea of Marxist progress and had a lot of countercultural ideology that was not very typical to Soviet media of the time. So that's something I've always been interested in and what I love learning about as a Russian major. So thank you for coming to my presentation today, and I would just like to thank Alexei Pavlenko, my advisor, and he's been my guide and just has given me so much helpful research and feedback during my thesis process, and also Professor Jake Smith and Professor Christian Sarache, and also of course Masha, because she helped me edit the Russian portion of my thesis a lot, which I'm sure was a lot of work. So yeah, also, I don't know if you can see, but I have two special people behind me. Yeah, so without further ado, so a lot of the theoretical framework for my project was based on Marxist time and how kind of time was defined during Soviet time, and then also ideology and the performativity of ideology, which I mainly focused on through Alexei Yurchak's work in his book Everything Was Forever Until It Was No More. But first on the idea of time. So time was very, I would say, uniquely characterized during the Soviet Union because you had this idea of this ideology of Marxism, and you wanted to attain a communist society, and the way that you were doing that was kind of overcoming time through intense labor and kind of converging labor and leisure as one, and kind of also characterizing time through the political leaders of the time. So time was experienced differently by Soviet people during Lenin and during Stalin, and then what I argue, and also what many people argue, is that it took on a total different temporality and socio-temporality during the times of Khrushchev and Brezhnev after Stalin died. So I looked at Stephen Hanson's Time and Revolution, in which he talks about how time was characterized differently under each of the Soviet leaders, and kind of how the whole idea, time was based around labor and wanting to create process and progress through labor in a really rapid and accelerated manner in order to achieve communist society in the present. And then another work I focused on was Catherine Verdery's Editization of Time, in which she talks about all of the ways in which the state kind of commodified time in order that all citizens could be a productive member of society and kind of not be able to restrain the state's ideas of time and how they should be working to achieve this so-called utopia. So this leads me into talking about ideology during especially late socialism, because that's what Alexei Yurchak focuses on in his book Everything Was Forever Until It Was No More, which I mentioned. And so he has this fantastic anthropological account of little jokes and little nuances in language, like lyrics and music, and a bunch of small cultural accounts of how people were able to subvert ideology. But then again, it's not even really a subversion, because the whole socio-temporality of late socialism allowed for these other modes of living to exist during a Soviet time, because you just weren't characterized by a super strong leader, and you weren't surrounding yourself around a war. You had no major Soviet nationalistic event to characterize yourself by. So this temporality of late socialism was very unique in that everyone was acting as if things were still the way that they were, kind of in a hyper reality kind of thing, but they were performing hyper normalization, which is a term that Alexei Yurchak coins. So speaking more about hyper reality and kind of the phantasm of a world that the Soviet Union was able to create through political leaders and kind of super statized events. There's this quote by Mikhail Epstein, which talks about how the Soviet Union kind of became this like Disneyland. Well, it's on the screen now and you can read it, but it's people didn't have to pretend that they were living in this utopia, because like everything was signaling that indeed they had arrived to this like perfect end. But yet at the same time, even though no one expected it, people kind of had this innate sense that things might not last forever. And so there were ways in their body language and behaviors and like literal language that kind of indicated that things were about to collapse. So speaking specifically in the realm of animation, which is something I'm really fascinated by, especially Soviet animation, basically there was this one studio, Soyuz Multfilm, that was creating just so many animations, so many cartoons, especially stop motion. Stop motion was one of their specialties, which is one of the facets of animation that I find the most interesting. And it really, after wartime, it really ramped up its production in order to be a competitor to Disney. But just the sentiments of all of the cartoons, even though like yes, they can sometimes look similar, they're just so distinctly like Soviet and eccentric, and like especially with the stop motion you can tell how like fragmented the movements are, and there are just always sentiments of loneliness and like these characters being loafers in most of their cartoons, at least from what I've interpreted. And that's why Cheburashka really like stood out to me, because this creature, he's so lonely, but he's so beloved because he just like wants to fit in theory. And even when you look at animation from earlier in the Soviet Union, or not even the Soviet Union, during Russian Tsarist times, like the early 20th century, there was an animator who was kind of the vanguard of doing like puppetry by using like dead beetles and like animating them. So I thought this was a very interesting clip, kind of seeing where stop motion animation started in the Soviet Union and how it had progressed throughout late socialism. And as I read Jack Halberstam's book about queering temporality and queer time, it's you really get this uncanny sense of just weirdness when you watch stop motion. They're just always creepy. So it's just this strange feeling that you know that these characters aren't real, because obviously they're like figurines, but also you like almost want to believe that they're moving on their own. I quickly want to talk about kind of the archetypal characters of Cheburashka. In theory, these characters are all super typical of Soviet animation. So for example, you take Cheburashka, he is this like adorable creature, and he just really wants to fit in so bad, and he wants to help people, and he wants to find friends, and it's kind of the idea of this Soviet child becoming the perfect Soviet citizen or whatnot. And he wants to join the pioneers in one of the episodes, and he has this really large ears and large eyes, and he's toppling all over the place, and he's kind of too naive for his own good. And so then he finds his kind of wiser, older friend Gena, the crocodile, and Gena is also a bit of an outcast, as well as Cheburashka. That's kind of what identifies all of the three main characters. But Gena is a little more philosophical, even though he's technically not super well read or well educated. But then again, he shares the similarity with Cheburashka, where he just wants to find friends, and they bond over this. And Gena kind of is a role model for Cheburashka, and so he kind of serves as this Soviet role model to look up to. And then on the whole other end of the spectrum, we have Shapoknyak, and she serves as the antagonist of the series. She's a trickster, and she's a little older than Gena, and I think her idea is that you're not supposed to like her because she's doing bad things, she's playing tricks on the children, and she doesn't want everyone to come together and be happy. But antithetically, she's scorned because she was this young girl during early Soviet times, and now she's kind of living on the fringes of society and not really belonging anywhere as well, just like Gena and Cheburashka. And you can tell she's kind of she kind of does these tricks out of spite because of that. So I think that's a very interesting part of her character because she represents so much old ideology. She was supposed to be this great probably model of a working woman and independent, but like in the end she is independent, but it's because she's on her own and she doesn't really find any friends. So in the end we kind of see the three of them come together from time to time, which is very nice to see and very, I think, unique about this animation about Cheburashka. So the episode I focused on was the third episode called Шапокляк. Here's a little clip right now that's kind of the beginning of the episode.
Отправляется с 8-го пути, 8 часов по московскому времени, извините. Повторяю, по московскому времени с 8-го пути.
Чебурашка! Чебурашка, где ты?
Граждане, предъявите билетики.
So to me, this is a very showing part of all of kind of our three main characters' personality types, and also like fear of authority, which it's a recurring theme in the Cheburashka episodes, which I think is an interesting thing to portray as a Soviet animation because Cheburashka and Gena are outsiders, they're always like in fear of these authority figures, but like in theory, like they should be just as well accepted, right? And also another thing which is harder to point out because it's in Russian, but the language of the train announcer, the woman, it's just like it's very jumbled and it's very repetitive, and I thought that was a signal of kind of Yurchak's ideology of like repetitive language and just like not really believing in what you're saying but doing it anyway to maintain this facade of like state ideology and Sovietism. So yeah, and then the next part that I'm showing is this clip.
Очень тяжело.
Слушай, Гена, давай я вещи понесу, а ты возьми меня.
Это ты здорово придумал.
So Cheburashka and Gena got kicked off the train and they're trying to find their way, and here we see a really cute and it's become famous kind of line from Cheburashka where he asks if the things are heavy, if their stuff is heavy for Gena to carry, and Gena says yes, and then Cheburashka suggests that maybe Cheburashka can carry their baggage and then Gena can carry him, and he says this is a great idea, which I just think is very adorable and telling of Cheburashka's character type and naivety. Also, I think it's also a very like performative aspect of where they're following the train tracks and then they go one way and then kind of backtrack and then flip the train switch and then decide to follow the other path, because like there's no reason for the little switch to have been flipped, but they kind of make a show of doing the right thing and following the right path, which I just thought was a very small but interesting nuance. So the next clip is about the factory, which I think is the most kind of poignant part of the episode because I think it represents time and I think it represents antithetical sentiments towards Soviet Union and progress and industrialization.
Почему вы такие грязные?
Мы в речке купались.
В речке? А кто ее загрязнил?
Фабрика.
So we see that the factory is polluting the river and these kids are dirty because they want to play in the river, but it's polluted. And then we also see that the function of the factory is completely useless. It's turning like larger branches into smaller ones, which I'm sure has some purpose, but like when you look at it on the animation, it just looks like a really funny thing. So now Gena is going to go up to the director and kind of fight for these children like him and Cheburashka often end up doing.
Здравствуйте.
Мы насчет загрязнения реки.
А что, загрязняем?
Очень загрязняете.
Все.
Yeah, so here I thought it was interesting how Gena kind of, he stands up to the director, and you can tell that the director is really afraid. So I thought this was an interesting subversion of when kind of the outsiders finally get to like override the authority, at least in like mannerisms.
До свидания.
Речка будет чистая! Ура!
And so the resolution is nice because like Cheburashka and Gena, they get lost on their journey out of the city, but then they kind of find a way to find contentedness and help these children and kind of stand up to Soviet authority. And I think it's just a really cute story, and it's just totally not what I would imagine a Soviet cartoon to be. I mean, not the helping people, like that's very typical, but just kind of the idea of grouping up against the factory, which is like just such a symbol of Soviet progress and labor and capital and Marxism in a sense, and then just fighting against that and that authority from these two loners who like were never accepted by society. And I found it just a really fascinating aspect of Cheburashka as a series, and why it's still so popular and still so hailed as this like Soviet paradigm of goodness and good animation and good nostalgic values. And then lastly, my favorite part of the episode, and overall I'd say that the songs are my favorite part of the series. They're so intensely like melancholic and lugubrious, and just really, even though the show's already antithetical to me, it even like furthers that point of just having these really minor keys. It's always Gena singing alone on his garmoshka or his accordion, and you just really feel the desire to live in a different socio-temporality. And so I'm gonna play the whole song of Goluboy Vagon, and I found a version with English subtitles. So, and I think they did a decent job. So here's that song.
Медленно минуты уплывают вдаль, встречи с ними ты уже не жди. И хотя нам прошлого немного жаль, лучшее, конечно, впереди. Скатертью, скатертью дальний путь стелится и упирается прямо в небосклон. Каждому, каждому лучшее верится, катится, катится голубой вагон. Может, мы обидели кого-то зря, календарь закроет этот лист. К новым приключениям спешим, друзья, эй, прибавь-ка ходу, машинист. Скатертью, скатертью дальний путь стелится и упирается прямо в небосклон. Каждому, каждому лучшее верится, катится, катится голубой вагон. Голубой вагон бежит, качается, скорый поезд набирает ход. Но зачем же этот день кончается? Пусть бы он тянулся целый год. Скатертью, скатертью дальний путь стелится и упирается прямо в небосклон. Каждому, каждому лучшее верится, катится, катится голубой вагон.
So as you could read from the lyrics, they're just like, it's the song about wanting to stay in one place and wanting to stay in one day and kind of staying still, which is very anti-Soviet, anti-Marxist. And even the physical being of them, like looking backwards, the three outsiders of this series looking backwards into the past, while this idea of a perfect future, they're rolling towards it on this train, but like they're not looking towards it, and they're looking away from it, and they know that this perfect future is supposed to come, but you know, they haven't seen much of it yet, so you can tell that they're skeptical, and you can tell that they just want to be and exist in the day that they already had, which was like a slow kind of nothing day. And the other song from the series, Puspigut, it also speaks to this as well. And it's always Gienna making these lamentations about desiring slowing down and desiring just like existing in one moment and kind of being static. So really quickly, I just wanted to contextualize Goluboy Vagon with another Soviet song that is more kind of representative of labor and progress forward and kind of the ideas of like Stakhanovism and working until you achieve this communist society. So it's called Vremya Vperyod, which means time forward. So I'll play a little clip from that. Yeah, so as you can tell, those are just like super different songs and you get totally different feelings from them. Like with Vremya Vperyod, you just want to like work quicker and kind of just kind of, I don't know, you're frenzied and it's frantic. But Goluboy Vagon, you get kind of this idea of slowing down and kind of relaxing and like spending time and being content by just being. So I thought that was a very interesting contrast of songs, which were both very popular for their times, and still now. And Alexei, he introduced me to that song, so thank you for that. So that's basically everything I wanted to say during my presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed, or I guess I should talk about the conclusion. So basically, Cheburashka, it's still a super popular animation today. Like, a new movie is even coming out next year that Russia is animating, where it's going to be like CGI Cheburashka with like real human actors, which I think is also going to evoke a lot of uncanny and be a little strange. Japan had the rights to the series for a while, and they made a bunch of readaptations of the series and like higher quality and like just better animation effects. And then also Cheburashka served as like the mascot in the Russian Olympics for like 4 Olympics in a row. So he's just this beloved cultural icon in Russian culture and Soviet culture, and even so many former Soviet republics. People I talk to here, people I talk to, just from the former republics, still know about him and they love him. He's just like this beloved creature. So it's nice to see that the sentiment still stands, but I don't think that people ever really question it, which I'm not saying people need to, but I think for me as a person from the States and having this Western gaze towards Russian culture, I think it's really important to kind of reevaluate and kind of think more deeply about how these super like Soviet forms of media that are hailed as like this paragon of Soviet culture and just like, oh, it's so communist, it's so propagandistic, like you can rethink it sometimes. And even if you don't know what the creators intended, it's nice to find these modes in which you can subvert the ideology. So that's what I was hoping to achieve with my paper. So that's basically everything I wanted to say. Thank you so much again for coming to my presentation. It's weird that it's not even on Zoom, I'm just making a video, but I tried to make it seem live. And thank you, Masha, again so much for putting on my work. And I mean, I'm sorry I'm not there to answer any questions, but if people really have any, they can always shoot me an email, and I'll be back on campus in a couple of days, so you can seek me out then. Thank you so much.